Hey there, awesome RC fan. Thanks for being here. Welcome to TJsRC. In the last episode, we briefly covered removing all the electronics necessary to continue our troubleshooting journey as we figure out what's going on with the Bronco. If you missed that episode, I'll link to it here. And today we're going to continue digging further into the Bronco as we take a look at the transmission. We're going to pull that out, look inside, and make sure that everything's working the way it's supposed to and properly lubed up. Before we do that, if you're stopping by the channel for the first time today, or this is the first one of our videos you've seen, consider hitting that subscribe button if you're an awesome RC fan who enjoys RC trailing and crawling, fixing, repairing, or learning how to do all that stuff. We got a lot in common, so consider sticking around. Now let's head over to the bench. Before you guys got here, I went ahead and removed most of the bolts necessary for our project today. The links are disconnected. The bolts that hold the transmission and the cross members in place are disconnected. I think there's one more bolt on the bottom of the transmission that I didn't get to yet, but pretty much everything has been disconnected in here that I need to. I just have to pull the links out of the way and slowly swing everything away from the transmission before I go ahead and start pulling it out of the chassis. Let me reposition you guys and then we'll continue. Alright, I took the screws out that hold the locker servos in place. We're going to take that out of the way, set that aside. Now we're going to slowly pop all the links out of place, slide that back out of the way. What I just realized is that I actually took out a bunch of screws that I didn't need to take out. I didn't actually need to disconnect the lower links or the screws that hold the cross member in place because it appears that the transmission bolts to the cross member. I don't think it's actually molded in. If I'm wrong, you can holler at me in the comments, but I've never actually had this apart. I also didn't bother looking at the manual, even though I made an entire video about get your manual out. Look at how your truck goes together.
Get your manual out. Learn how all the pieces interact.
Alright, so if we did this correctly, the transmission should just pop right out. Apparently my washing procedure that I've been using has not been doing a very good job of getting into all these nooks and crannies here. So we're going to give this a nice cleanup off camera, move the chassis out of the way, then we'll dig into this beast and see what's going on the inside. Before we dig into that transmission, I thought, you know what, I just made that snarky comment about not looking at the manual before I tried tearing the transmission out, and I could have saved myself a bunch of time if I had done that, and because I took out a whole pile of screws that I didn't actually need to. Before we dig into that transmission, I'm just going to peruse the manual here and figure out exactly which screws I do need to take out. Alright, now that we got it cleaned up, we're going to take her apart and we're going to see what's going on the inside. Off camera, I went ahead and removed all of the screws that hold this together. This is all basically one unit, and the transfer case is molded onto the back of the 2-speed transmission. So once all the pieces are together, it's one unit, but the transfer case just makes up this area here on the back. Okay, so let's pull the cover off. That all looks the way it's supposed to look. No discoloration in the grease, no grime in the grease, no dust or dirt particles in there. That's excellent. So this top one here is the output from the transmission, and then this drives evenly this gear here, which output at the front to send power to the front drive shaft, and this is the rear output to send power to the rear drive shaft. So as the spur gear is turned, that spins this upper gear, turns these two, sending power to the front and rear. That looks exactly as it's supposed to. So we're going to close that back up. I don't think it needed any grease. We don't need to worry about adding any. I am going to put the screws back in for that cover. As we go through the truck here, I'm slowly replacing the hardware with stainless steel. Thanks to my beautiful wife who got me a stainless steel hardware kit as a Christmas present. Thank you, sweetheart. Okay, the back transfer case cover is on. Now, we're going to very carefully pull this apart. Alright, we'll look at one half at a time here. This part here is actually the shift mechanism. When you shift from high to low, that slides this arm back and forth. When the shift servo pulls this arm back, these teeth slide into this large gear here, so that as the main shaft spins, then it engages this gear with this rear gear to change the ratio. And when the shift servo pushes this linkage forward, it engages this side of these teeth with this smaller gear down here. As the spur gear and shaft spin from the motor turning the spur gear, when the servo has this linkage all the way forward, this smaller drive gear here turns the shaft that goes to the transfer case. So when it's all the way forward, using this smaller gear here, it's in high. And then when the linkage slides back, so that this smaller gear engages this larger gear, that is low. And if you've noticed, there's no discoloration of the grease, there's no grime or sand particles in there, so that is excellent to find out. So nothing's getting inside the transmission, that is super. And there's a nice film of grease on all of the gears, so we're not going to worry about adding any. And now we're going to slowly put the pieces back together. There we go. So now these held together. This is all the way back. So as this turns, it should smoothly. And then we'll slide this forward. High gear. Yep, everything sounds smooth and feels smooth. Now we're going to go ahead and put the rest of the screws back in to hold this together, because really our main goal was to check to make sure everything was functioning the way it's supposed to and that nothing was out of place or amiss. None of the problems that we had anything to do with the transmission. I'm pretty confident of that. Let's go ahead and get the rest of these screws put back where they belong. Feels nice and smooth the way it's supposed to. Shift mechanism moves nice and smooth as well. I would have to say this has been a success. We took it apart, made sure everything was functioning the way it's supposed to, discovered there was nothing wrong. That's awesome. We got it back together. I got the new stainless steel hardware in there. In the next video, we'll reinstall this back onto the cross member in the chassis. And of course, as we do that, replace any of the hardware that goes back in with some of the new stainless steel hardware. Thanks again to my beautiful wife for getting that for me for Christmas. I appreciate that. Plus, I just love shiny. She knows me so well. Thanks for being here, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.